have communities in Northern Ontario, First Nations communities. We don't have doctors. We don't have high schools. We don't have clean water, and this is the reality that our people live in.
Welcome to Face, a place for stories that shape us. My name is David Peck. Well, welcome back to Face. It's always so exciting to be interviewing anyone connected, really, to the Toronto International Film Festival. I've been coming for many, many years. I've been recording interviews with so many interesting, special artists and writers and producers and directors and actors. And today we have a couple of very special guests here with us as well, Tanya Talaga and Shane Belcourt, both here to talk about their new film, Red Power Rising. And you're going to need to find out a little bit more about both of these people if this is your first introduction. Tanya, thank you for joining me here on Face to Face.
Thanks for having me.
Shane, greetings and welcome back to the show. Is it one time you've been on the show before, Shane, or is it twice? I can't remember.
I can't remember either. I know for sure I was here before talking about Amplify and Tansei to everybody who's listening. And the second one may have been Red Rover, a feature narrative, but I feel like that was. But it's always good to be back on the show, David. You do such a fine job of asking poignant questions and keeping us feeling comfortable. So I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate that. And it's got to be pretty exciting for you, premiering the film. Going to be available on the documentary channel ultimately. So if you're listening in, do stay tuned for more about that. The film is, I'm going to say, produced by Makwa Creative. That's makwacreative.ca. Tanya's going to tell us a little bit more about that. And if you want to learn more about Shane and you're just listening in and want to find out just how good looking he really is, reach out to shanebelcourt.com and you'll find out a lot more about him. Tanya, can you tell us a little bit about sort of the behind the scenes before we step into kind of the narrative and this incredibly important story? And before we go any further, congratulations. And what an incredible, compelling, powerful, do I need more? Moving film. It really, really is. This has got to be at the top of everybody's list this year.
Miigwech, we feel the same way. This is a labor of love, and this film is so important to all of us as Indigenous storytellers. We needed to get the word out about Anishinaabe Park and about Louis Cameron and all the warriors who 50 years ago stood up. And we still need our people standing up. We are still standing up, and the story is ongoing. We're delighted, thrilled, can't believe that it's premiering it too.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting, right? I mean, I'm just thinking of you both and all your team and the Q&As and the coffees and the chilled vodka. I'm sure there'll be plenty of it coming up in the not so distant future. Tanya, you're a celebrated author, journalist, Massey Lectures, 7 Fallen Feathers to the Knowing. Can you talk a little bit about the creation of Makwa Creative? And is that all you?
Yes, it is. I started Makwa Creative 7 years ago. The company's 7 years old, and this is our 4th documentary feature. Saying that, though, our 3rd was a documentary series, limited series, 4 episodes, based on my last book, The Knowing. And I started the company because I had worked in mainstream media for 20 plus years, and it became apparent to me that to tell our stories in a good way and to really practice narrative sovereignty, I had to start my own company. And I am so grateful, that I took that leap. It can be disheartening sometimes working in mainstream media and being constantly told that no one wants to read stories about, Indigenous people, or not having the support and not having the breadth and the scope to be able to tell our stories with a proper context, to be able to work with Indigenous people and creatives as well. So Makwa was formed with the birth of Spirit to Soar, which was my first documentary film. And that's actually how I met Shane.
Yeah, which is amazing. Shane, so I think that's a new phrase for me, narrative sovereignty. I love it. And
sovereignty.
Yeah, my philosophical background, I just want to do a podcast now on that. I think we need to come back for maybe part 2. Shane, is that something, and please unpack it for us a little bit. I think I get a sense for that, but was that a driving force for you as well about being able to tell your own stories, filmmaker, producer, creator, writer, and so on?
So my dad, Tony Belcourt, who you would have met, if you recall, David, in Amplify's season 1, episode 13, in which I had an episode exploring a conversation between my dad, Tony Belcourt, and my auntie, Maria Campbell, where they're conversing sort of frontline political activation and community organization versus sort of insider placement of elected leadership in government. And so it's a conversation that is also happening in Nidamadiz, Red Power Rising, that same idea of like, where do we, how do you activate and how do you make change? And what's the best path? And are these two things in conflict or are they together? And I bring that up only in the sense that when my dad was a young man, he was chosen from Prairie leadership to move to Ottawa to start the Native Council of Canada with Harry Daniels and others. And the point of that is to sort of have a presence on the national stage for Métis, non-status, and off-reserve Indians in the city of Ottawa, where otherwise they were a political know-nothing. They couldn't get anything done in the province because they say you're a federal problem, and the province with the federal government said, no, you're a provincial problem. So on to Ottawa they went to fight for change. And when my dad left, the beauty of and the splendor of Alberta, where he is and where our community's from in Lac St. Anne, his dad said to him, son, get our land back. That was the number one thing he wanted my dad and the leadership of that time, the very young leadership, by the way. These were like 20-year-olds moving to try to make change. He said, get the land back. That was a big deal, obviously, for the Métis people who had all their land swindled through Métis script and other policies as the prairies were cleared and settled. And to echo that, when I went to film school, my dad gave me another copy of Louis Riel's biography. And he said, son, get our stories back. And for him, it was like, I know you're not going to do the political thing I do. You're going to want to do more of the artistic filmmaking thing. But if you are going to have access and opportunity, please wield that to give back to who we are and to the continuation of who we are. So the idea of Native sovereignty is something that is sort of passed down through families. When you recognize that someone in a family has the ability to be a storyteller in whatever means that may be. And that was something that was definitely my dad gave to me and I've always cherished. And I pass it on now to, my daughter and my extended beautiful family that I have now with 4 sons as well. This idea of continuance and responsibility. And that really is what Native sovereignty is anchored in. How it expresses itself outwardly to others is nothing about us without us. So no producer, nobody can go off and make something about an Indigenous life, an Indigenous story that doesn't include us at the helms of shaping that story. We're no longer consultants, we're makers.
Yeah, getting our stories back. Wasn't it? It's Richard Wagamese who said that stories are meant to heal. And I mean, I'd like to think that that applies to us all. And I'm pretty sure that's what Richard meant. It was across the board. But I love this idea of narrative sovereignty and getting our stories back. Tanya, this is for me, was a very layered film. If somebody was interviewing me right now and saying, hey, tell us more about the film and what was it about and what really are some of those, I mean, we got human rights, we've got history, we have power and authority and politics and reconciliation and forgiveness. There are so many layers to this film, and it's part of the reason I love it. I'm getting the goosebump thing going on right now. What is it for you, or is it one thing?
It's what Indigenous storytelling is all about too. We see things in circular ways. We see the past, the present, the future all together. You can see that in all of our writings. You can see it in our films too, right? And so we have all the feels, as you just said, in this film. We have the history. We have the genocide, the ongoing genocide of our people, the effects of Indian residential schools. There was about a dozen Indian residential schools in and around the Kenora area. Louis went to Indian residential school. He went to St. Mary's, and he and all of the people, the warriors with him, they were all coming out of the system, and this is a system where you grow up on a First Nations reserve, a government sanctioned community. Sometimes you're born in an Indian hospital and then you go off to an Indian residential school. You are an outsider. We are outsiders because of the Indian Act, right? I'm a status Indian. And so that means that I'm governed under the Indian Act, which has been in place in this country since 1876. All of those warriors, there's that separation on our own land. It's like were second-class citizens or crown wards. And having that story told through young people 50 years ago who have dreams and love and hope and ambition, and they're also coming of age in a time where it's the 1960s and 1970s, where you've got the American Indian movement, you've got the Black Panthers, you've got civil rights movements happening. You're part of that, you see yourself in these stories too. And then you try and bring that home and you try and take over a park which represents so much that's been lost in our communities. And this is a story we tell, and it's a story told through one man too, right? The leader, Louis Cameron, and his family. His family now, 50 years later, so many of those same issues those kids were fighting for, we're still fighting for those same things 50 years on. And that you see all of those layers, when you ask that question, that's all in the film. You see layers of family, you see the father and son narrative, you see Lynn, his former wife as well, and they had 4 sons together. You see all of these things. You see our warriors, our leaders, and people that remember parts of the occupation, people that remember other things like the Native People's Caravan going to Ottawa. There's so much in this film, we could have made a 10-part series.
You really could have. The Oka crisis makes it in as well, right? And so many other details as well. Tanya, I love that you said, I think the line is that you see things in a circular way. And if that's not a lesson to take away from the film, but a way of a worldview for all of us, really, because I think so many of us are, I don't know if we're born with blinders on, but we sure seem to ease into that eventually. An existentialist might say we forget about how to be children. We don't live in that wonder and that mystery anymore, and we've regimented or we've mathematized the world, I suppose, and the blinders come on and the mathematics comes out. But man, that's for me. How does one start to see the world in a circular way, comprehensive, holistic, and so on? I think it's a really, really important question. Shane, and I want to come back to that if we can, Tanya. Shane, Tyler, I think his son, Louis' son, says at the beginning of the film, and I mean, we can talk about the film or not talk about it if we want to be careful with, giving too much away. But the distinction between terrorist and warrior, can you unpack that a wee bit? Because I think that's really, and by the way, what a fabulous opening. It's just so engaging and compelling, and the music is out of the park.
Yeah, the music's done by Tom Wilson, who I got a chance to make a feature documentary with, and then we became lovers and best friends. And it was a real joy to have him with his son Thompson to work on the score for the film and to provide some original songs. So yeah, the music is quite a standout, and we're super appreciative of his talents and his heart. When it comes to the idea of like warrior versus terrorist, or one example that I'm always reminded of is we've always referred to it the resistance of 1885. Which was, if you look at what's going on in Anishinaabe Park, 1974, the small action of taking over a know-nothing park in relation to the size and scope of Canada results in a full blitz of military parade, similar to what happened in Ipperwash and many other places, Standing Rock recently, Oka, which you mentioned. The preponderance of squashing down the spirit of resistance is really sort of a result of that seeding of the colonial project. Is it because our persistence in any time we have, God forbid, thriving is a threat to the narrative of Canada's original story of like, oh, the French and the English came and they upper and lower Canada and the railway, and look how beautiful and this is, and the mountains and the cottages. And when I go back to 1885 and I talk about that idea, if you go which to the credit of a lot of people, it used to be called the Northwest Rebellion. And that's when you went to the Batoche Historical Park in Saskatchewan, you would see that it was the rebellion, all the signage. And they changed it to the Northwest Resistance. Also, a little sidebar to that story. The first time the Gatling gun was ever used, a machine gun was ever used in North America, was against the Métis and First Nations people who were fighting side by side just to hold on to their lands at Batoche. And it was the Canadian government who brought an American up to let him try out the gun. Wow. So it's not like what happened at Anishinaabe Park is new. Sadly, it's not. So for us, the idea of always having resistance in us or rebelliousness or a warrior, the misnomer of that when you say it's a terrorist is that it's somehow somebody is acting out of hate. That somehow these people who stand up, who come together, who organize, are now filled with violence and hate. And that's what the terrorist is acting from, to bring violence and hate to the nation state of Canada, to the cottage goers of Kenora, to the campers and families of Kenora, that we're bringing all this hatred and anger to them when we stand up to resist. That is not what it is about. As you see through the film, as you read through Louis's words, Tommy Kijik and all the leaders, they're compelled by love. They're driven by the love of who we are, who their brothers and sisters are, who their grandparents are, who their kids are. The continuation of a circular story is anchored in a perspective that all time is one. So what I am doing now is because of what happened generations before. What I am doing now is speaking and standing place and energy for what's going to happen generations going ahead. That perspective is my breath in and out is the breath of continuance. That is not mine. That is my grandkids and my great-grandkids that I have not met. So that feeling and that story of what we're standing for is from that central idea that we love who we are and we want to thrive, not just barely, merely survive. And if that is seen as a terrorist act by the nation state of Canada, how absurd and how revealing is that to what is a colonial agenda?
Tanya, do you think this comes down to how we define human rights to some degree? I've done a lot of work as a consultant in international development and visited a lot of communities around the world. And I don't think what's a human right here is necessarily a human right there, wherever there may be. I don't know if you would agree with me on that or not, but I think that's a theme that came out for me. So yeah, terrorist, that gets written by the people who have the power and the authority. But hang on a minute here. No, these are warriors standing up for what's true. I love that you said, Shane, that they were compelled by love. Wow. Like that's talk about out of the park, right? Like we should be just sitting down having that conversation. How do we define love? And let's pull from a Christian ethic here. How do we love our neighbor? Anyway, Tanya, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
There's always been two sets of citizens in this country, Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. I was talking a little bit earlier about the Indian Act, but Canada has always had blinders on when it came to our people. They set up entire governments, bureaucracies, agencies, systems without our people in mind whatsoever. There has been apartheid in this country. Were Indian residential schools until 1996. There were day schools. There were Indian hospitals. There are reserves, all of this is separate, and we were always put out of the way. Canada never wanted to talk about that. That was always an Indian problem, right? There was always these silos built, and instead Canada looked out and it's in, its human rights record of, isn't this wonderful? We have universal health care for everybody. We've got education for everybody. But that's never been the case. It's never been for everybody. I have communities in Northern Ontario, First Nations communities. We don't have doctors. We don't have high schools. We don't have clean water, and this is the reality that our people live in. It is so incredible to me that Canada does not see that. And instead we trumpet human rights records and this country being somebody that, or a state that upholds human rights when in our own land, on our own land, we do not. And I don't know when that's going to change. It's been, Cindy Blackstock once said to me, it's like a willful blindness. And that's exactly what it's always been.
Yeah. Kierkegaard said the jaundiced always see yellow, right? And so how can you not see that if somebody isn't there peeling back those layers? Shane, is that your job as the storyteller? Right? Is that the job of the artist? And Tanya, this question is for you as well, to peel back those layers and to hopefully, I don't know, what is fertile soil? If you can't get through, how do you ultimately get through? Because this is something that's interested me forever. It's part of the reason I started this podcast, Face to Face, to allow people to tell their stories, to say, hey, you know what? These folks are doing it this way. Maybe you can do it the same way or another way. Right? Does any of that make sense?
So I just want to go back quickly just on the idea of human right. So in Indigenous right, as it's understood, understood in law and in practice, is not an individual right. I don't have an individual right as a Métis citizen from Laxton, Alberta. Nobody has an individual right. My good friend Zoe Hopkins from Six Nations does not have an individual right. Everything is collective. It's a collective right. It's recognized as a people. Each specific people from each specific community you are from holds together a right. That shapes our sense of what we can buy, sell, and trade, what we can own or move. And that is a big part of the difference between sort of a Canadian human right writ large across the, versus an Indigenous sense of being. And it's it's enshrined in law through treaty or whatever it might be. When it comes to sort of like this film, Red Power Rising, is one more opportunity for me as a documentary director to make pure propaganda. I've said it before, and I'll say it every time. There is no such thing as objective documentary filmmaking. Any cut is a choice. Any angle is a choice. Any question is a choice. Any invitation to somebody to speak is a choice. Any question you're sending out to an archivist, find this, find that, is a choice. It is all curated. And in that sense, I've always thought and always approached the making of this film as the director and co-writer that this is about making pure propaganda. This is the propaganda of telling more and more stories about who we are and where we come, where not only what are our challenges, but what is the deepest part of our humanity that propels us forward to fight and face those challenges. It is a pure act of love to make this film, to speak with these family members, and to be honor bound when taking in somebody as great as Louis Cameron, who struggled as greatly for fighting like he fought, and the effects of that on his family, on his sons who didn't take his name. Our challenge and our drive has always been, as the collective filmmakers, whether that's the DPs, Sean and John, Indigenous, our sound people, Charlene Moore, Joe, people who are also Indigenous, our entire crew, our production designer, David Hannon, all these Indigenous people who sat with all of the people that were there, the families. We're all coming with the sense of, I am you, you are me, and I'm honor bound to tell the story of love for your loved ones. And I will not turn my back on any fight that may come because I've given you my word that we will tell this story in a good way. And that's something that, as a propaganda filmmaker, I am absolutely unabashedly proud that this film continues that journey and that struggle and that desire for me, not to have native sovereignty, but to also have celebration on the screen from that sovereignty place.
So that's going to be the soundbite, Shane. You're a propagandist and you're unabashedly proud about it. Just that's all I'm going to say right now, right? You know that, right? That's
cheers.
Listen, I think you're absolutely right, right? New York Times, all the news that's fit to print. How about all the news that we think is fit to print, right? Absolutely. Shifting the narrative. I love that. Maybe getting back a little bit more to that sovereignty claim earlier on, Tanya. I love that as well. I don't want to reduce this to an either or, Tanya. And again, for these questions are for both of you. They're for everyone listening as well. That's the whole point here. I hope a pebble or two has already dropped in the pond. Tanya, is it greed? Is it racism? Is it fear? I mean, why is this so difficult to why is it so difficult for us to hear? I mean, do we want it just to go away? We talk about reconciliation, but I'm not so sure.
Well, it's baked into the fabric of Canadian society, right? It's baked into what grew this country, the ideals that grew this country. The laws are, all based, this whole country, Judeo-Christian laws of man being at the top of the chain. And it's all about king and empire as well. That's what Canada was founded on. And it still is the pillars of all the institutions, all the laws, all the governments that we have in this country. And so if you have built that state, education is also very much a part of it, public education, Catholic education, university and college system too. If you've got an entire system where we are outsiders and we have never been part of that, turning this ship around, making people care, educating people is taking a long time. I always talk about education reform and the need for all of our curriculums to reflect actually the truth of what happened in this country. And we are still such a long way away from that. Every province does things differently. And depending on who gets into power, they backtrack or they change things. Well, that affects generations of children that are being raised not knowing the truth. My mentor, Murray Sinclair, he always used to say that we have grown lawyers, doctors, educators, filmmakers, not knowing the truth in this country. And it's until we change things, reform education, tell the truth of this country, that is when we're going to grow up the next generation of lawyers and doctors and editors that know exactly what this country is. Can we get to that part? Are we there yet? No, we're still in the truth finding phase of truth and reconciliation. So we have a long way to go.
And a lot of stories to tell. Yeah, and a lot of films to see. Are we still then, if I can sort of riff off of what Tanya was saying there, are we still, to quote someone from the film, I can't remember who it is, are we still living in a state of emergency of a particular sort?
It has always been a very complicated reality for Indigenous families and communities. And it's also very, it's very difficult to speak on behalf of everybody, right? So your audience should know right away that you're talking to Shane Belcourt, whose dad is Tony Belcourt, whose grandparents are Matilda, LaRondelle, and Emile Belcourt, right? That's my family. That's where I'm coming from. These are the teachings and understandings that I have. But with that, I'll offer this idea that state of emergency for a lot of communities is definitely true, whether it's housing, water. There's a lot of crises. The repercussions of the nuclear bomb of residential school continue to persist in so many Indigenous communities, Inuit, First Nations, and Métis. But what I think sometimes we get lost in, those are things that we're all working on that everybody sees. But what often people don't talk about, and they don't know and they don't see, there's a generation that is coming right behind us, Gen Xers, that is ready to flourish. They've grown up learning their language through language revitalization efforts that changes their entire worldview. There is no it in Indigenous languages. It didn't bring me my soup. My grandmother or a relation of me brought me my soup. And that extends to all animacy of all things in the living universe. So when you have that language base, whatever it might be, it anchors you in a way that is, as I struggle to learn my own Cree language, it shakes and rocks the foundation of who you are. So to have generations growing up, they were always there, but more of them coming and learning their language as a fundamental place to start learning their worldview, that power, that reclamation work in our hearts and our families is incredible. Our families know how to laugh. If you think you can get this far without laughing your head off and surviving all the waves of shit that's come our way, there is no way you would get through if it was just always sad country songs. When we love a sad country song, but we also love to laugh our heads off. And when I think about getting together with family or friends, the number one thing we do is laugh. And every now and again, we'll dip into politics and get frustrated and bang our fists on the table and how could they? But a lot of my point here is a lot of how could they has turned over generations. What can we? And that turn within families, that turn that started really, really strongly with Louis Cameron and other leaders, and whether it's grassroots or whether it's frontline people like Murray Sinclair and others, that started in the late 60s and 70s. How can we? What will we do? Mm-hmm. For ourselves, with ourselves? How can we, who grew up without some portions of love, embrace and love our kids and spoil them? This reclamation, this is the energy that leads to things like the Indigenous Screen Office, which is a part of Native sovereignty. This reclamation is the part that leads to more language violation programs. For all these languages that have on the verge of going to extinct or getting themselves back again. So I think, yes, it's a state of emergency. In many instances, it always has been since the plague of pigs and disease came with the Spaniards and just wiped out 80 to 90% of our populations across the Americas. Like, that's a staggering figure. But look at us prosper and thrive as we continue to struggle. And I hope that your listeners really kind of have a chance to not think of one narrative. We are not one thing. We are urban and rural. We are hunters and trappers, and we are scientists and technologies and medical doctors and astrophysicists. We've always had science in our lives as Indigenous communities. The Cree people have always had star stories. We understand that the North Star is the North Star, and it only circles every 26,000 years. We knew that. Your scientists knew that also through different means. So we have a beautiful base to make reclamation from. And we have a beautiful place of always being, which we always will be. And I want to clarify too, I'm using a collective we. There are many specific individual communities that are from different language groups and different nations. And I'm speaking generally for the listeners who might be Indigenous. I am not trying to own or speak for everybody. This is just a collective top level conversation piece. And that's what I'm saying on that.
Yeah, no, there's so much to take away from that too, Shane. I mean, extend relationship. I mean, even sort of calling back to what you said earlier about it's not the I, it's the we, right? You're talking again about the we, about the community. This isn't about an individual, right? Which is what I typically think in Western society, Western cultures. That's what we think of. Don't step on my toes. This is my right. We don't think of it as our rights. I don't think we do. And I think we need to get back to community. And I mean, that's another lesson for us all. From Red Power Rising and the film and Louis' story and all the other layers. We got to wrap up here in a couple minutes. Unfortunately, this is one of those 3-hour interviews. I think that would have been bare minimum as far as I'm concerned. We're barely scratching the surface here. Tanya, you got to be pretty excited about TIFF, or at least I hope you are. I'm sure people will be listening to post TIFF and they'll be able to see the film on the Doc channel coming up soon. Any expectations? Any hopes? You pointed out this is about still telling the truth, and I love that. I love that.
Well, we've got 8 Indigenous films here that are strictly from the Indigenous Screen Office. And so I'm super proud and can't wait to see the films, and just to be with everyone again and just hold each other up through this process and just share our stories with the world. And to show people that we really have a presence here, and it's been a long time coming. It's just, I'm thrilled with it. I can't wait for our communities to see this film on the big screen. We have so many people coming down from Kenora, from our communities to see the film. We have leadership coming in to see the film. It's going to be emotional. Our families are coming. So it's a thing. And then afterwards, we're going to have a really great party and Tom Wilson's going to sing.
I'm sure you are.
Awesome.
I think worth price of admission is seeing that young short interview piece with Alanis Bomsawin. It was fantastic. I had the privilege of interviewing her a few years ago as well, and it was a real honor, and we had a great time. Shane, thank you. Tanya, thank you for your time today. Thank you for this film and the story. I really didn't know anything about Louis Cameron. I think, I'm for the most part, a fairly well-informed person, and had no idea. And I have to say, we talked a little bit about it. One of the better books I've ever written is, help me out here. Is it Bob Joseph? 21 Things I Didn't Know About the Indian Act.
Indian Act.
Yeah.
For sure.
Knocked my socks off. And I'm going to be picking up one of yours in the very near future as well. Tanya, thanks so much for joining me here today. The film is Red Power Rising.
Miigwech, thanks for having us.
So there you have it. That was Tanya Talaga and Shane Belcourt. You can find out more about both of them and their work that they are involved in. Makwa Creative, that's MAKWA creative.ca. And I was teasing Shane a little bit earlier. I hope you've listened to it. And if you haven't and you're just joining now, you better go back and find out how and or why. Shane Belcourt. You can find out more about the work that he's doing. Both Shane and Tanya, storytellers, filmmakers, creators, artists. And I learned so much in this interview, but also from the film as well. And as far as I'm concerned, this should be in your top 10 list if you haven't already seen the film and weren't able to see it at TIFF. It's going to be on the documentary channel. You'll be able to find it there. And make sure you dive in and start telling people about it. This is a part of our history that we need to know about, and that we need to talk about, and that we need to continue to challenge the status quo on. This is a film that for me was about so many things. It's about community, and it's about reconciliation. It's about relationships, and it's about healing, and it's about friendship and family, and about pushing back, and about not accepting things. And the story is not unfolding the way that it needs to be, and we need to change that. And for me, again, this is always about incremental change. It's about the splash and ripple effect. Drop the pebble in, and we got to trust in the story. We got to trust in the power of the narrative and the healing, and watch. We hope, radical hope. We trust and hope that the ripples will grow. So thanks for joining us here. If you love or at least like a little bit of what I'm doing, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, face2facelive.ca. You can find out more there. And the film is Red Power Rising. Thanks for joining me here today on Face to Face. My name is David Peck.